are joined by a really important guest, Radhika Fox, who's with North Star Strategies. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Great to be with you.
I'm so glad that you're here because we are talking about something that we drink every day, that is around us all the time, and that sometimes we take for granted. That's water, you all, water. Water is really important. It's a resource that is scarce and often becoming scarcer and sometimes is polluted. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about water and what's at stake and what's going on.
Yes, thank you so much for really highlighting this really critical issue. And you're right, Kristen. In the United States, most people just take water for granted. They turn on the tap, they pour a glass of water, they give it to their kids. They don't think twice where that water came from. Is it safe to drink? They flush their toilets. That water is returned safely to the environment. But what people don't realize is that our water infrastructure here in the United States, it's aging. It's failing. Actually, a water main breaks every 2 minutes in this country, and that really has impacts on communities all around the country. And so, we really think it's critically important for everyone to understand how essential water is and how we need to continue investing in it to ensure that our communities and our families can thrive.
I mean, it is so important. There are, just in my own community, I can share that in my daughter's high school, it was found that there was lead in the high school pipes. And so all the kids couldn't drink water at school. They had to bring the water bottles. We know that where I live in Washington State, we really strongly rely on the snowpack for droughts. And that when we have a little bit of snow like we've had recently, then that impacts our ability to have clean water and our lakes get low and we can't water our lawns and water becomes scarce. And that is happening all over the country to one degree or another, both infrastructure that is old and aging and needs updating and access to water itself, given that climate change is happening. And so, what are the intersections between water access and climate change?
Well, first of all, you sound pretty knowledgeable about water, Kristen. And, I often say that when we look at water challenges in this country, there are really three things. It's some places have too much, right? And so flooding and sea level rise is a huge problem. Other communities have too little, so drought and water scarcity, as you were describing. And then in other places, it's poor quality because we have things like lead pipes that contaminate the water, like we saw in Flint, Michigan, and as you described in your daughter's school. But we also have other things like PFAS or forever chemicals that
Yeah.
have entered our waterway. So too much, too little, poor quality. When we think about the intersection between water and climate change, as you said, one thing I talk to folks about is that actually, when you think about climate stress, it really is water stress. That's how we experience it in our daily lives. What are the streets around your kid's school flooding, right? Are they the water whiplash is critical to the climate challenge? And really, when you think about water infrastructure in this country, how I said it's really aging and it's old infrastructure. It's kind of like if you have a crack in the foundation of your house, like it might be fine, but then when that hurricane comes, right, or that deep freeze happens, the intersection between climate and more extreme weather events and water infrastructure become very real very fast. I did a lot of work in Jackson, Mississippi, where that was exactly what happened. It was an aging water system that was kind of hanging on by a thread. There was an extreme rain event, and the whole system failed, and you had the capital city of the state of Mississippi without water for days and days. And so that's really what we're going to actually unfortunately see more and more of as our climate gets more uncertain and unpredictable. We're going to see more of these types of water infrastructure failures, unfortunately, in communities all around the country.
And those water infrastructure failures, of course, I know you know this, but just sharing with our listeners, often interact. For example, we recently had that Potomac River sewage spill that from a water slash sewer infrastructure problem now into an actual environmental problem. And of course, then the cycle continues. And as the cycle continues, one thing we know is that low income communities and communities of color are disproportionately negatively impacted in this water crisis. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about that.
Yes, well, so the Potomac River spill, just something people don't realize, that pipe, that sewer pipe that broke, was put in place in 1962. So that's how old some of this infrastructure is. And so, unfortunately, this huge environmental disaster that we saw is really a result of that aging infrastructure. But I'm so glad you raised this question about who is most impacted by these water challenges. And two things I'd share on that front. One is that we know that it is lower income people, communities of color that are living in places that have the most vulnerable water infrastructure. I think probably one of the worst examples of that is Flint, Michigan, where you saw a whole generation of children being poisoned because of the lead in the drinking water. And I've spent time in Flint, Michigan with the mothers there. And, we even continue now to see very real developmental challenges for those young people who were drinking that water. So we know that it is lower income communities and communities of color that are most impacted. But just last week, we celebrated something called World Water Day, where it's really a moment. It's spearheaded by the United Nations. And what we also know is that there are a lot of gender disparities as it relates to water and water access when you look internationally. I often talk about how water is women's work because it is women and girls who, in developing nations, are the ones that are carrying water from the river to their homes for their families. And think about just the time and the energy that is spent towards that. And we also know there's a gender dimension to it because in developing communities where they don't have private sanitation facilities, you see a drop off of girls leaving school when they hit puberty age because they don't have the services that they need. So there's many dimensions of who is most vulnerable as it relates to how we're investing in water.
What can people do? I know listeners are like, whoa, wait. I always like to think that we think about our infrastructure, but we don't. We start to take it for granted. It starts to become part of the background that you can turn on your shower, turn on your tap, get water, to drink that's safe. Maybe go swimming in the local swimming hole. This is not something that we can take for granted or should take for granted, but it's easy to do it because it's around us all the time. So, what should people do to make sure that as many people as possible, that means every person, has access to healthy water?
That's a great question. So, one thing is, I think it's just important to educate yourself. Like, most people don't know where their water comes from. Like, what is the water source? Is it the Potomac? Is it the Anacostia River? Where is it? So, learning where your water comes from. And then every water provider in this country, these are local government agencies that play this role, they produce annual water quality reports on their website. So, it's a great way to know, like, what is the quality of water, what's being done to protect it, just to educate yourself and know what's happening for you and your family. Also, right now, we are in the fifth year, the last year of funding for water infrastructure through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And so there's a big effort in Washington, D.C. to call for continued investment in these local water projects. We made a down payment of $50 billion. It sounds like a big number, but it's unfortunately just a portion of what we need to invest over the next decade as a nation. So the extent to which folks are active in government or talking to their members of Congress, it's really important to really talk about the importance of these kinds of investments that every community needs. And so those are a couple of ways to get involved.
Should we be talking to our city, our county, our state, and our federal elected officials about water?
All
Yeah.
of the above, because as you know, water is life. There
Yes.
is no society, there's no economy. Even our bodies, personally, are
Yep.
80% water. So it is essential. It's probably life's most essential resource.
Yeah, I always think about that, water is regulated and brought to us by so many different levels of government, and it is a patchwork of infrastructure that really, as you said, does need updating at literally every level. And so, checking in with all of your elected leaders, city, county, federal, state, is, pretty good idea right now. I live in the West, and of course, we have a lot of issues with getting water from one place to another place in the Western states, and relying a lot on what's happening, as we noted at the beginning, with snowfall every year, and whether or not we have a snowpack that's our reservoir or not. So it's important. It's really important. I was sitting with a dear friend who was, I believe she was about 93 years old, by the side of a river recently, and it was called the Icicle Creek River. And she said that I can't remember her wording, but the idea stuck with me, that waterways should have also be treated as if they are people too, because we rely on them so much. And sometimes, in the Western states in particular, we take out too much for the river to be able to flow, or to have people downstream have access to water. But it takes all of the city, county, state, and federal working together to make sure that that river, stream, or tributary can get from the place it starts to where it ends, and also be part of sustaining life for us as humans too. So it's complicated, but it's important. Do you have any closing words of hope about water?
Well, one of the things that gives me hope as it relates to water is that there is so much innovation that's
Mm,
happening at the local level. Where, for example, you mentioned you're in the West. There's amazing examples of, tribes and
yep.
hunters and fishermen coming together to
Hmm.
steward the resource. There's
Yep.
really exciting efforts where companies, like Amazon, for example, you said you're in Washington. They have a water positive goal, of how do we make sure that we are not compromising this essential resource. So I think that the challenges that we face around the need to invest, are significant, but there's so much innovation happening, and actually what we are also seeing is a lot of new technology
Hmm.
solutions that are helping us be able to use investments more wisely. So there's a lot to feel optimistic about. But again, we can't take this for granted. Water is our most essential resource, and it's going to take all of us, as you said, to steward it wisely.
Thank you so much for being with us, Radhika Fox. Thank you so much. Thank you for supporting and maintaining our water too. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all you do. I love Moms Rising, so it's been an honor to join you.
Well, we love you too, so thank you.